It was a busy week. This week, pro-Palestinian protests continued on college campuses, and some administrators decided they had had enough, and in the case of Columbia and UCLA, called in law enforcement to clear out encampments. Over 2,000 people have been arrested. This has been crazy. Stephanie, are you surprised about how quickly everything escalated this week, from the size of the protests, the responses?
Yeah, I think I am a little surprised, mostly because you had students who were, I think, it's a pressure cooker situation. And you have young people who are feeling incredibly disaffected. You have young people, I think a couple of articles have pointed out that this class of 2024, these were the kids who COVID seniors. They didn't get a proper graduation when they graduated from high school. They will probably not get an in-person graduation this year, and depending on the campuses that they're on. So this is a group of young people who are incredibly disaffected. They've been in this pressure cooker. And so all of a sudden, they are, I think, feeding off of one another. And on top of that, in a place like Columbia or some of these urban campuses, you have outside forces coming in. And I think the fact that they were riled up was one thing. I was a little surprised by the swiftness with which the administrations sought to quell the dissent.
Tom, the protesters are demanding that the universities, the endowments, divest from any investments in any companies that do business in Israel. And I understand on its face, it sounds like they can just do that. This is really, really complicated. We're talking billions and billions of dollars, and it's highly illiquid. It's difficult to do. Is this, and they're so angry with universities for not doing it. Is that one of the issues, that this isn't necessarily a demand that can just get solved for? And in many cases, the university doesn't necessarily control the endowment.
Right. Well, I think the demand is totally off base. And because I don't believe, the end of the day, that there is a broad humanitarian viewpoint here that they're really after. Because if that was the case, we'd hear something about Ukraine. You know, the Columbia professors talk about why Israel, why not all kinds of inhumane treatment by China, Korea, and they say because U.S. policy is to support Israel. It's one that we are involved in terms of our foreign policy. Well, Ukraine, we're heavily enmeshed in, and there are all kinds of innocent life being there. And you had a huge package on the floor of Congress about passing legislation to help Ukraine, and not a peep out of any university about civilians being slaughtered there. And so if you really look at this, it's hard not to think that there is an anti-Semitic undertone to an awful lot of this, that I really question how much of it is broad humanitarian interest, because you can't have Ukraine happening side by side with the slaughter and, yes, some genocide there with Russian forces slaughtering soldiers who are trying to protect civilians who have no cover from air raids, and not a peep out of a single university of a humanitarian interest in helping there.
Sam?
I mean, this is obviously so loaded.
You were given like a preach face to Tom right there.
No,
just so you know.
No. Oh, I didn't mean to. No, it really is such a complicated issue. And I think part of this is the grief of these students who have not had any sort of outlet. And I think they're so disconnected. They have not had a normal college experience. But aside from that, there is something about Israel that definitely riles people up. And I think what scares me the most is the broad chasm between the way that people talk about how this protest was, what this protest was. So you have some people who are saying, oh, it's this like kumbaya Woodstock environment. And then you have images and you have accounts from people who are like, you know, they're Jews who are saying, I cannot get to my class because they're physically barring me. And I think that the NYPD came out and said there's, quite a large proportion of the people who are arrested who are not students, who are over 30 years old, who are not from New York State, and who have been arrested multiple times. So I'm sort of eager to get to the part where we understand what really happened here, what extent of it was outside agitation, and then the conditions that made the students really susceptible to something, blowing up in this way.
The prosaic thing that scares me as an employer is that these young people are now going to be coming into the workforce. And I'm not talking about protesters specifically. I'm talking about this whole disaffected generation.
Yeah.
And I think about the fact that they are a generation that is more depressed than any other generation before. They are a generation that has more screen time than any other generation before, less attention span, higher degrees of mental distress, and less social skills. I mean, a lot of articles have pointed out that these are young people who can't communicate on the basketball court because they don't know how to talk to each other in person. They're so used to communicating via phone or text. And so all of these young people are coming into a workforce where we already see incredibly high levels of disengagement among young people. And I don't know how much care and feeding it's going to require to get these otherwise incredibly intelligent young people up to speed to function in our workplaces.
Yeah, I wanted to just make a quick point on the difference between, I think, the outrage around Ukraine and Israel is that these students feel that we have influence over Israel as opposed to we don't have influence over Russia, right? So there's one point.
Well, we have certain ability to resist Russia in a big way to try to help a civilian population that is being killed without protection, and not a peep. Not a peep. And there's something really off about that.
Yeah.
Hold on, Ahmed.
And I did just want to say, I have outrage over Ukraine as well, and I think a lot of these students do. But I actually know, I have a really close friend who's Jewish and is a student in UCLA, grad student. And he was at the Indian encampment. So, and he said, all he showed to me was that the students were peacefully protesting, right? And this goes to the Lydia Paul-Green piece, where there's these two dueling narratives of what's going on the ground there. And then we have the anecdote extrapolations. Yes, there's anti-Semitism we've seen, and some of these are outside agitators as well, and that deserves condemnation outright. But we also, I think, need to approach it with empathy and humility and humanizing what these students are going through, because some of them have real righteous indignation about what they feel is going on in Gaza. And of course, obviously, October 7th was absolutely horrific and unacceptable. And I think what we have to be able to do is hold space for those who are in those protests that are peaceful, as well as also condemning these sides of it that are inexcusable.
But now you have to add the complication,
of course,
if you're President Biden, of the fact that Donald Trump is telling anyone who will listen, these are Biden's protests. Biden wants this to happen. How does President Biden thread this nearly impossible needle, given all the factions and an election 186 days away?
Well, this is where, the low information.
And so much misinformation being pushed.
This is where it becomes a real issue, because I think what people don't see is that Biden has gotten so much flack from these protesters for his policies that are protecting Israel. And when you say, why Israel? Why is that what animates people? I think that we're looking at the culmination of not just, this isn't fully organic. We're looking at a culmination of years of IRGC propaganda that has really tried to get people on the side of Hamas. And that is something that, students are not necessarily fully aware of, this entire machine that's behind what they're protesting.
That's a great point, because the point of universities is to educate. Clearly, this issue, Middle East, Israel, has hit a chord. And with really rare exception, I have not seen a university say, we're canceling classes today. We're going to have mandatory education sessions on the history of Israel, the history of the Middle East, history of the Holocaust, and how we got to where we are today. So you can have students who, instead of chanting things that do sound as if they are supportive of abolishing Israel and genocidal acts against Israel, that they truly understand what's going on. Maybe that wouldn't be effective, but a university not trying under these circumstances to serve its role in education, rather than trying to negotiate for 3 weeks with a bunch of people that they should have cleared tents from after day one, is kind of ridiculous. I want to say, though, as a New Yorker, the NYPD was great. MVP credit to the NYPD. The men in blue did their job here in a way that was quick, efficient, professional, without violence. And I think they get credit for that.
But why did they need the NYPD?
Because they broke the law.
In the first instance, what were they?
The NYPD,
Yeah.
did you see the inside of Hamilton Hall?
Oh, right, but I'm talking about before. I'm talking the week prior when they first called the NYPD in, before they were occupying a hall. They were trying to clear them from the quad, basically. So why did they need to bring in police to clear a student protest?
Because in many instances, it wasn't just students. There was lots of people who were not students there, right? And that's why it's such a complicated problem,
Exactly.
right? The right to protest is hugely important. But the university is also in charge of these students. And if they're looking across their quad and it is filled with non-students and agitators, you have 2 kids in college, right? And so think about all of those parents who sent their children away to New York City to college.
Yeah.
That school's got to be in charge of that. And parents could be saying, where is law enforcement? What's happening on this? It's just so complicated. As a parent of college students, how do you see this?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, when I look at those pictures of, and you know, I have 2 kids in college, they are babies. I mean, when you talk about these young people who, you know, aren't quite fully formed and their development was arrested even more by COVID, like those are my kids. And so when I see these pictures of these young people, you know, up against a police line, I get a little choked up because one of them could be my kids, you know? And so but at the same time, you know, I've been in forums with university presidents and having, you know, listening to parents of all backgrounds talk about the safety of their children and their concerns about the safety of their children. So I understand that universities absolutely feel an obligation to maintain make sure that the students who are there feel safe. At the same time, look, I'm a First Amendment absolutist, so I am going to stand up for the rights of young people to protest every day of the week.
Especially at universities, which should all be about free expression. But when it turns into something else, it's when it's a problem. Your point on Biden, though, I think is the right point. This is really tough for him. When you look at polls of how youth vote looked like it was breaking for Biden before October 7th and what it looks like now, he really does look like it is going to be very tough to get the kind of turnout from the youth vote that really helped put him over the line in key swing states.
All right, we got to go from free speech to speech that you pay for. It's time for a commercial. Everybody is staying put. When we come back, our nightcap returns with our MVPs of the week. Tom already gave us a preview with the men in blue. You do not want to miss it. 11th hour in the nightcap. We'll be right back.